Welcome to richplanet.net, the programme which aims to uncover the truth behind the alien and UFO mystery. I'm Richard D. Hall, and this week's programme is about the UFO Cover Up. To assist me in getting to the bottom of the cover-up, I requested the opinions of two experts who've been investigating the UFO subject for many years. Tim Good is one of the world's leading UFO investigators. In his worldwide research, he has interviewed key witnesses and discussed the subject with astronauts, military and intelligence specialists, pilots, politicians and scientists. Gary Heseltine is a detective constable and has investigated hundreds of police UFO cases in the UK, involving over 700 British police officers. His PRUFOs database, the police reporting of UFO sightings, has been compiled over the last 7 years of investigation. I asked him to explain his belief in the UFO cover-up.
There is a decision from somebody very high up to have a broad policy of downplaying the subject, because it doesn't make sense to me that you can have 3,000 commercial pilots, 2,000 military pilots, people who have had millions of pounds spent and dollars spent on their flying education, whose testimony is just totally ignored. Yeah. You know, you have scientists who come forward who said, I think, you know, McDonald in the 60s, James McDonald, very famous figure in America, physicist who looked at the subject of UFOs and concluded that there is something going on here, and why isn't the world taking notice? And people will say he died in mysterious circumstances, etc. But nevertheless, he was a physicist who examined the subject, somebody of good repute, good public speaker, who sort of booked the system. And these people are ignored. Stanton Friedman, people, you know, I've seen him, I've met Stanton Friedman several times, he's a brilliant speaker. But people forget that he was a physicist. He worked for NASA. He worked on space projects. So he really knew his stuff. And for him to conclude all along that UFOs were real, then it makes me wonder why aren't people taking notice. And that is really the thing that makes the conspiracy angle so compelling.
The question arises then, who are the perpetrators of this cover-up? In order to answer this question, we need to go back at least 60 years to the 1940s, when American President Harry Truman was a key figure in US secrecy. In 1947, following the Roswell incident, he set up top-secret MJ-12 group. This group of 12 men reported directly to Truman on a need-to-know basis and were responsible for managing the alien and UFO cover-up. In the early 1950s, both Britain and America set up groups to investigate the UFO phenomenon. But Tim Good believes that the purpose of these groups wasn't quite what it seemed.
You mention in your book two different groups, one in the UK, the Flying Saucers Working Party, and another one called the Robertson Panel in the US. And these were groups which were set up specifically to investigate UFO cases. Now, you make out that they were actually almost doing the opposite of what they were set up for,
sure,
which was to play down the subject.
Definitely, which was in fact why there was such close liaison between the Americans and the Brits engaged with the...
And another thing I found fascinating was that in I think it was 52, when UFOs were sighted over Washington, D.C., Churchill became interested in it, and he asked the question of this Flying Saucers Working Party, and they'd basically said, well, there's nothing to it.
Prime Minister. All the unexplained reports have subsequently been explained, and pay no attention.
What intrigues me then is you say that you think that the Flying Saucers Working Party were influenced by the Americans.
Definitely.
Who told them to play it down.
Definitely.
So that didn't come through a political channel then, through Churchill.
No.
So there are elements within the secret services. So the Americans are in control of elements within the British government without the permission of our Prime Minister.
Definitely.
I think that there was a definite policy. We have always followed America's lead on UFOs. And I think there was a definite decision made, probably by high-up government then, and the military, in the 50s, maybe even the 40s, probably the late 40s, Project Grudge sign, around that time, after the estimate of the situation in 1948, which concluded UFOs were real and interplanetary, that was destroyed, but Ruppelt, who ran Project Blue Book for a couple of years, in his book, Report on UFOs, Unidentified Flying Objects, which is where the term came from, he said he saw that report and it did exist. So we've got a credible person now saying it did exist. It's not made up by UFO enthusiasts. This is a real piece of document. It was knocked back. The military wouldn't accept it, so it was destroyed because it didn't fit the pattern of what they wanted. I think after that there was a decision made that we're still following to this day.
So it seems that the cover-up was being orchestrated by the Americans. Peter Horsley was a senior Royal Air Force commander with top-secret clearance. He is alleged to have met an extraterrestrial and tried to gain access to America's secrets.
Air Marshal Sir Peter Horsley, who worked for Prince Philip and the Queen for 7 years at Buckingham Palace, during that period, 1954, he had a 2-hour meeting with an extraterrestrial being, he claims, and I believe him because I knew him, arranged for him via a British Army general. And he was, in any event, very interested in the subject, which led to the meeting with this alleged extraterrestrial. But when he worked in the operations room in the Ministry of Defence and dealt with the UFO situation to a degree, liaising with the Americans, he asked to gain access. He had, at that time, Sir Peter Horsley had, like, for example, top-secret atomic clearance, so he could discuss nuclear secrets with the Americans. But when he asked about the UFOs, they said, sorry, Peter.
And how do you think that's come to be? Why are we the poodle? Why is our Secret Services the poodle to their Secret Services? When did that initiate in your mind?
Because the United States is the most powerful nation on Earth.
And they do this
I mean, it doesn't just apply to the UFO situation. The United States is in charge of our deployment of nuclear weapons.
In the past, some British officials, such as Lord Mountbatten, who later became the Chief of Defence Staff, are known to have gained knowledge about extraterrestrials. Mountbatten spoke of a UFO recovered by British scientists and airmen, which contained small men from another planet. I asked Tim Good if today's Chief of Defence Staff has the same knowledge.
Lord Hill Norton was former Chief of Defence Staff and head of the head of the NATO Military Committee. He certainly did not have a need to know, and I believe him. I found that incomprehensible, but he said maybe, you know, if at a different time, if something big was going on, I would have had a need to know, but there wasn't, and he wasn't Chief of the Defence Staff for all that long.
Okay, and if you look at the MOD's hierarchy in the armed forces, I mean, how far down do you have to go, or where are the?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Even very high-ranking generals, a four-star general, say, wouldn't necessarily have a need to know, and it might, but someone of a lower rank, say a 2-star general, would. It works like that. It does not follow the normal rules.
And the method by which they make these people keep this secret, can you elaborate on that? Is it threats, or is it golden
it certainly can be. It certainly can be threats. Yes, I mean they're taken regularly to a sensitive. If they have what so-called above top secret clearance, which is top secret code word, which is an accessed group. Yeah. So you have, in addition to top secret clearance, which is the highest, you're then compartmented in a small group, and you certainly can't talk about that information. And they are periodically taken to what's called a sensitive compartmented information facility and reminded of their oaths and so forth. And certainly they can be threatened. I'll never forget what a very good friend of mine told me, who was a former deputy chief of MI6. He's now deceased. And I asked what the connection was with, how come the Americans seem to know so much, and tremendous high secrecy, and the British government always denying everything. And his words to me were, Timothy, I think you'll find we leave that to the Americans.
Right.
And that's what I have found. The Americans are in control.
It seems clear that the whole thing is orchestrated by the Americans. But when and how did it start?
I'm firmly convinced that communication with select groups of military and intelligence people, scientific intelligence people, very restricted, specialized groups that first began in 1943.
The MJ-12 group, which you list in your book, set up by Truman in 1947, do you think when he set that group up, and I find it fascinating that there are no political figures in that group, they're all military and other types of people,
Yes.
which is quite undemocratic really, in my view, that they reported to him on a need-to-know basis, so he basically could
Sure.
keep that very, very well secret.
It's always been like that, a very tight ship, and the first people to get involved were the nuclear physicists, for example, people who dealt with the Manhattan Project, because they were the ones who were used to dealing with compartmentalized information, which was a process initiated by General Groves at the time of the Manhattan Project,
Right.
specifically for the Manhattan Project.
So, when Truman made that decision after Roswell, do you think he was getting his orders from somebody else then? Or was this an American president just on his own bat saying, right, this subject needs to be covered up?
I don't know, but I think increasingly, mostly the military is in charge of this operation, to the extent that a lot of people in the intelligence community are not part of the process.
It seems that the Americans have most of the information relating to UFOs. But are there any secret government or military groups within the UK which have access to the information?
Do you think that there's perhaps a secret part of an organisation that has the knowledge? I mean, I'm led to believe possibly that GCHQ has elements in it that have knowledge of UFOs.
I certainly think that GCHQ will have the facilities, because it's a listening post, to tap into any phone call that they want to, as Filingdales, etc. The thing is, unless you're in that environment, we'll never know for certain. And I don't dwell on things we'll never know.
It's, a lot of the intelligence with regards to UFOs in the UK is held by GCHQ.
Definitely. Because, you know, GCHQ works hand in glove with America's National Security Agency, and they do share quite a lot of information, and it seems about the UFO situation as well. I have tried to get information from one or two people, but they're absolutely tight-lipped about it.
So do you think, because obviously whenever there's UFO reports, they all go to the MOD, and so do you think there's contact between the MOD and GCHQ?
It would depend. It would depend on the department in the Ministry of Defence.
Right. Okay.
You see, what I've learnt, and I learnt a long time ago from two reliable sources, is that the most sensitive work on UFOs was done by the Provost, the Royal Air Force Provost and Security Services. And they are the equivalent of America's Office of Special Investigations. They deal with counterintelligence, policing, breaches of security and things like that. And they are renowned as being among the most efficient counterintelligence agencies in the world.
Okay.
Provost and Security Services. Right. And as you may know, I got arrested for poking around Rudloe Manor. In Wiltshire, where the headquarters of the Provost and Security Services was located at the time in the 1980s. They've moved now. The actual lodger unit is buried, or was buried, within what's called the Flying Complaints Flight. I have some interviews with people who were involved in the Provost and Security Services, who had top secret clearances, but they could never get near the UFO. Right. That was the most restricted.
So you think that particular group has a lot of the knowledge.
They certainly did. I can't tell now if it's been passed on. There are other groups like naval intelligence. Nothing, as far as I know, has ever been released by the British government. Maybe something about Operation Mainbrace in the early 1950s, but I think they have a very deep involvement as well. That's my guess. Certainly the United States naval intelligence people do.
Okay.
And what about the Ministry of Defence, who deal with the thousands of reports sent in by the public each year?
When you have objects that are reported by police officers, multiple officers, then somebody should be taking notice. Now, there is a standard position that the MOD always use. Yeah, it's reported, forms are filled in, sent to the MOD within seconds of making a decision, this is of no distant significance. That is a stock line. And the MOD position is ludicrous.
Yeah.
It really is.
One thing that always troubles me is the fact that they can just say that if something is of national security, therefore they can keep it secret.
Yeah.
So really, to me, it makes a mockery of the Freedom of Information Act. But they use this, it's of national security, so therefore we keep it secret.
This is why the Freedom of Information Act is not as good as you think it is.
Yeah.
Because they have so many exclusion clauses that they can opt out.
So what are the reasons for this incessant level of secrecy perpetrated by the Americans and abided to by our military and intelligence agencies?
Let's just take a look at the abduction phenomenon, for starters. A conservative estimate would be that hundreds of thousands of people have actually been abducted. That's my opinion. Now, the question is why? Well, what I have learnt regarding that scenario is that the purpose is indeed for hybridization, but it's not for our benefit.
Yeah.
It can be argued that it's for our benefit, but what I'm told is that it's for their own agenda, which is takeover of this planet. Now, that's kind of disturbing, if it's true. I don't know it's true. I'm just saying what I have learnt. And this is obviously very, very disturbing. And apparently the hybridization program, half alien, half human, whatever the proportions are, is to make us acquiescent, less violent. I think I can see very good reasons for that. But at the same time, is it going to make us more acquiescent to what they want to do, which is to take over this planet? They need this planet. I'm sure there are several spacefaring races who need this planet. Earth is unique. Astrophysicists are absolutely right about this. Earth is unique. Not obviously in the Milky Way, but for quite a ways around. And I think for donkey's years, it's a very attractive prospect to people looking for alternative planets to have bases on them or whatever.
Some people would say that the decision to keep this subject played down, covered up, is more to do with people maintaining their own power, people who are in positions of power, i.e. the oil cartels perhaps,
Sure.
people who make armaments. You know, we wouldn't need that if we suddenly realized there was a threat which was massively more capable than our own. So some people would say that it's more selfish and greedy reasons why, you know, why it's covered up, rather than the the reason that you gave.
Okay, it is certainly one of the principal reasons. There's no question about that. There are power factions involved here. There's absolutely no question. Vested interests very deeply entrenched and have been since contact was established.
There was a decision made that we're still following to this day that said we will downplay this subject. Question is why? I think probably initially it was the risk of a Third World War. The Russians, Cold War, probably maybe very good reasons initially. But beyond that, those reasons don't stand up now, in my opinion. If you talk to Stanton Friedman will say that the reason is because the people in power will lose power. And I think that is the most compelling reason why UFOs are not taken seriously. Because he will say, and I agree with it wholeheartedly, is that if you look at, say, just the armaments industry, America is the only true superpower, although you could argue that China and Russia are getting that way again. when you look at that, so much money is meant, trillions and trillions of dollars are spent on armaments, preparing armaments. Now, what happens if suddenly UFOs are declared real, interplanetary, we can't catch these things, they have the ability to be invisible, they can come and go in our airspace with impunity, we can't do anything. You're therefore totally rendered defenceless, therefore America is not the great power it once was, the armaments contracts aren't worth the paper that are written on, the thousands, the hundreds of thousands of jobs that are involved in that production of that industry, they're not going to affect. So I think that shift in power, and because we've always followed America's lead, is the primary reason why it's not disclosed.
It's alleged that in 1954, President Eisenhower met with a race of extraterrestrials and decided that the human race was not ready for the information.
And he said that they said they wanted to educate Earth people. They were very concerned about the nuclear build-up and everything. And Eisenhower was quite shocked by this. And he said, I don't think we're ready for that yet. And in the end, apparently they agreed. And they said, well, we're not going to stop being around.
That if aliens do exist, which I'm sure they do, and species visit us, which I'm sure they do, somebody's got to be in these things, so something that's alive. So it's the logical sequence of events is that they're from a technology that's developed faster than us, and that technology may have got rid of the need for fossil fuels, and it could be free energy, what people all dream about. And again, it's lack of power, because the knock-on effect is all the people who are powerful now are not so powerful because there's no need for those products anymore.
Do you think that we call it the cover-up, do you think that's actually perpetrated by an alien force then? Or do you think that's purely human beings?
That's a very good question, but I myself think, well, the two things I'd like to say about that is that, first of all, from what I've gathered, many of the aliens don't want us to know what they are doing here. And that's kind of understandable, and they could take retaliatory action if, say, those few people in the United States government wanted to start talking. And it's quite possible they've done that already.
Do you think
Yes.
that people are receiving, or the power structure at the top of it is some kind of alien force?
I do indeed think that is the case. But I'm encouraged by the fact that on numerous occasions, both Russians and Americans experienced interference at ICBM, Intercontinental Ballistic Missile sites,
Right. So you think
on many occasions. Yeah. And they have also shown the ability to launch those rockets if they chose, or to shut them down so that they couldn't be launched. So they are in charge.
Could it be that it is the aliens themselves that are orchestrating the cover-up? Gary Heseltine is a detective constable and has investigated hundreds of police UFO cases in the UK, involving over 700 British police officers. His PRUFOs database, the police reporting of UFO sightings, has been compiled over the last 7 years of investigation. I asked him to explain his belief in the UFO cover-up.
There is a decision from somebody very high up to have a broad policy of downplaying the subject, because it doesn't make sense to me that you can have 3,000 subjects, somebody of good repute, good public speaker, who sort of book the system, and these people are ignored. Stanton Friedman, people, you know, I've seen him, I've met Stanton Friedman several times, he's a brilliant speaker, but people forget that he was a physicist, he worked for NASA. He worked on space projects, so he really knew his stuff. And for him to conclude all along that UFOs were real, then it makes me wonder why aren't people taking notice. And that is really the thing that makes the conspiracy angle so.
Welcome to richplanet.
Commercial pilots, 2,000 military pilots, people who have had millions of pounds spent and dollars spent on their flying education, whose testimony is just totally ignored.
Yeah.
You know, you have scientists who come forward who said, I think, you know, McDonald in the 60s, James McDonald, very famous figure in America, physicist who looked at the subject of UFOs and concluded that there is something going on here, and why isn't the world taking notice? And people will say he died in mysterious circumstances, etc. But nevertheless, he was a physicist who examined the subject.
The program which aims to uncover the truth behind the alien and UFO mystery. I'm Richard D. Hall, and this week's program is about the UFO Cover Up. To assist me in getting to the bottom of the cover-up, I requested the opinions of two experts who've been investigating the UFO subject for many years. Tim Good is one of the world's leading UFO investigators. In his worldwide research, he has interviewed key witnesses and discussed the subject with astronauts, military and intelligence specialists, pilots, politicians and scientists.